The forest road was empty when I turned off the highway, the last strip of asphalt narrowing into gravel beneath the tires. It was late autumn in northern Oregon, mid-October, and the air carried the crisp scent of rain-soaked pine. The clouds above were heavy and gray, moving slowly as though thinking. I rolled down the window halfway. The cold bit my skin, but the air tasted clean. I had come here to spend a week in a remote cabin after my last client session. I told myself I needed silence, just silence. For 12 years, I had worked as a clinical therapist in Portland, focusing mostly on obsessive-compulsive and anxiety disorders. My office sat on the second floor of a small building that smelled of lavender oil and coffee grounds from the cafe below. Over the past few months, though, something had changed. I had begun hearing my patients' intrusive thoughts in ways I couldn't explain. Specific sentences, fragments, urges, spoken in their voices but echoing in my own head. It wasn't imagination. They came uninvited, as if someone had left a door open inside my mind. At first, I blamed exhaustion. The human brain has ways of tricking itself when overstimulated. But when I caught myself whispering one of my patients' fears, "Push her, just push her," while standing behind a stranger at a crosswalk, I knew I needed to leave the city. That thought wasn't mine. I never wanted to harm anyone, yet I felt the weight of it in my jaw, the shape of the words behind my teeth. The forest would be good, I told myself. Isolation to let the noise settle. The cabin sat near Mount Jefferson, about 4 miles from the nearest ranger station. I had rented it through a friend who used to work with the Forest Service. The drive-in took longer than expected because of fallen branches and slick mud patches. I saw no other vehicles, no signs of people, just dark conifers rising on either side, their tops vanishing into fog. The sun had already sunk behind the ridges, and the light dimmed into a faint metallic blue. When I finally arrived, the cabin was smaller than I imagined. 2 rooms, wooden walls weathered and pale, a metal roof speckled with moss. There was a porch facing west toward a clearing that ended in thick forest. The silence here was total. No traffic, no electricity humming, no voices, only the faint rustle of needles and the distant knock of a woodpecker. Inside, the air was cold but clean. A small stove in the corner, a bed with a wool blanket, and a single table beneath the window. I lit the propane lantern and watched the warm glow spread slowly across the walls. I felt safe for the first time in weeks. I spent the first evening unpacking and writing in my notebook. I described the trail I had taken, the color of the light, the smell of wet cedar. It was an old habit, writing down observations to calm the mind. Before sleeping, I made tea and listened to the forest. The wind brushed against the roof like a hand smoothing fabric. My thoughts began to slow. The last thing I remember before drifting off was how strange true silence felt. It wasn't emptiness, it was presence. The next morning, a pale mist covered everything. Dew clung to the porch rail, cold enough to sting my fingers when I touched it. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee and breathed deeply. Somewhere far away, water trickled, maybe a stream or runoff from rain. I decided to find it later. I spent most of that day hiking the nearby trail marked by a faded orange ribbon tied to a birch. The path wound between ferns and tall spruce, the ground soft with needles. Each step released a faint earthy scent, rich and damp. I walked slowly, listening for animals. Nothing threatening, just the small life that exists in such places. Squirrels chattering, the wing beat of a jay, the steady rhythm of my boots on soil. After about an hour, I found the stream, a narrow ribbon of clear water cutting through dark rocks. I knelt beside it, dipped my fingers, and felt the sharp chill race through my arm. For a while, I simply sat there. It was peaceful. That night, as I prepared to sleep, something odd happened. As I lay in bed, I heard a voice whisper faintly in the back of my mind. It wasn't external. It was internal, like a memory, but it wasn't mine. "She doesn't deserve to breathe." The words came softly, as though carried by my own breath. I froze. I recognized that sentence. It belonged to a patient named Lydia, a woman who had once confessed that she imagined suffocating her sister during arguments. We had worked through her guilt for months. I hadn't seen her in weeks, yet her voice, clear, desperate, angry, was inside me now, here in the quiet cabin hundreds of miles away. I sat up, heart pounding. The forest outside was silent. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The cold air hit me like water. Nothing moved. I stared into the trees, waiting for something. A sound, a shape, but there was only fog and moonlight. I went back inside and sat by the stove until dawn. The next morning, I told myself it had been a dream. The brain replays familiar words under stress. It didn't mean anything. I focused on routine: breakfast, a short walk, reading. The silence was supposed to help. Yet I noticed how easily my thoughts drifted toward the people I treated. Their stories, their obsessions. Each one a fragment lodged somewhere behind my eyes. By evening, the rain started. Soft at first, then steady. It pattered on the metal roof, a soothing rhythm. I cooked a simple meal, rice and lentils, and ate slowly, listening to the storm. But later, while washing the dishes, another thought appeared. What if the knife slips? I dropped the knife instantly. My breath caught in my throat. That sentence belonged to another patient, Aaron, who had spent weeks describing his fear of hurting someone unintentionally. The phrasing, the tone, it was exact. I backed away from the sink and pressed both hands to my ears. Nothing changed. The voice wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the silence. For the next 2 days, I tried to distract myself. I hiked farther along the trail, reaching a ridge overlooking the valley. The air was cool and thin. I could see miles of forest, the faint shimmer of a lake beyond. At the edge of the ridge stood a weathered wooden sign, "Lookout Point 1.4 miles." I followed it until I reached a small fire watchtower, long abandoned. Its steps creaked under my boots, and the smell of old wood and rust filled my lungs. From the top, the view was endless. Up there, the silence deepened until it pressed against my eardrums. It was as though the forest itself was listening. For a brief moment, I felt entirely detached from everything human. The sky, the earth, my breath, all blurred into one slow movement. Then another thought appeared. Jump and let it stop. It wasn't my thought. It was from a patient named Tyler, a man who once told me he dreamed of ending everything from a high place. I stepped back quickly, gripping the railing. The cold metal steadied me. I stayed there until my pulse slowed. On the walk back, I noticed how the forest had changed. The mist had thickened, muting colors into shades of gray. The trees seemed closer, their trunks dark and wet. I heard water dripping steadily from branches. Every sound felt deliberate. When I returned to the cabin, I found a small animal print near the porch, maybe a fox or raccoon. It grounded me, something alive, something ordinary. I took it as a reminder. I was still in the real world. That night, the voices returned stronger. Not whispers now, but overlapping thoughts, half-familiar phrases tumbling through my head. Some were fragments of old sessions. Others were ones I couldn't place. Don't look in the mirror. Cut it out before it spreads. Make it quiet. I curled on the bed and tried to slow my breathing. The words weren't commands, they were echoes, residue of fear, guilt, compulsion. They had always trusted me to hold these thoughts safely, but maybe I had absorbed them too deeply. Therapists often talk about emotional transference, but this felt like something physical, as if their mental noise had found a home inside me. At dawn, I made coffee and decided to visit the ranger station. It was about 4 miles north, reachable by trail. The air had turned colder overnight, and frost clung to the ground. I wore gloves and followed the path carefully, marking landmarks as I went. Fallen birch with a split trunk, a cluster of mushrooms near a log, a sharp bend where a large granite boulder stood. Each landmark helped me feel anchored. Halfway there, I saw a deer standing in the clearing. Its coat was damp and glistening, eyes calm and unblinking. We watched each other for several seconds before it turned and vanished silently between the trees. That kind of moment can quiet the mind. It reminds you that fear and beauty can share the same space. When I reached the ranger station, the door was locked, but a note on the window said, "Out on patrol back Friday." It was Wednesday. I laughed softly at the irony. I had come seeking company, and the wilderness offered none. The walk back felt longer. Every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of leaves, the faint trickle of water, even my own heartbeat. My mind began to replay voices again, this time blending into my own thoughts so smoothly I couldn't tell them apart. Don't trust your hands. Stay still or they'll notice. You're not alone here. I stopped walking. My breath fogged in front of me. I scanned the trees slowly, deliberately. Nothing moved. The rational part of me knew these were mental echoes, not hallucinations. The human brain, deprived of stimulation, turns inward. Silence can become a mirror. But as I stood there, I realized the forest had gone completely still. Not a single bird call, not even wind. The silence pressed like a weight, thick and unnatural. I took one cautious step forward, then another. The air smelled different, metallic, almost sterile. My instincts told me to keep moving, to return to the cabin. I followed that feeling. When I arrived, I shut the door and bolted it. My hands shook. I sat at the table and forced myself to breathe slowly. The lantern hissed softly. The smell of propane was comforting, almost human. That night, I wrote everything down. Every thought, every voice, every strange silence. The act of writing helped separate me from them. I began to see a pattern. The voices only came when I fought the quiet. When I filled the silence with fear, they entered. But when I observed calmly, without judgment, the forest seemed to settle. It was as if it reflected whatever state I brought into it. The next morning was clear and bright. Sunlight filtered through the trees, golden and soft. For the first time, I felt rested. I decided to take one last hike before leaving. I packed water, a first aid kit, and a small compass. The trail felt friendlier in daylight. Birds returned, singing lazily from branches. The scent of pine and damp soil filled the air. I touched the bark of a tree as I passed. It was rough, grounding, real. Every few minutes I stopped, looked around, and named something aloud. Fern, moss, stone. Kept my thoughts in the present. Around midday, I reached a small glade I hadn't noticed before. It was circular, surrounded by tall firs, with a patch of sunlight in the center. I sat down on a rock and drank from my water bottle. The silence here was deep but gentle, like the pause between heartbeats. I closed my eyes. That's when the final voice came. Not harsh or foreign, but soft, almost familiar. You don't have to carry them anymore. I opened my eyes and exhaled. It wasn't one of my patients. It was mine. My own thought emerging clearly after days of static. I realized I had spent so long absorbing others' pain that I had forgotten how to listen to my own mind. The silence wasn't dangerous. It was cleansing. It stripped away everything borrowed and left what was real. I stayed there for a long time. The wind moved gently through the trees. I could hear small sounds again. The click of a beetle in the grass, the creak of a branch, distant water. The forest had never been empty. It had only been waiting for me to stop filling it with noise. When I returned to the cabin that evening, I felt calm. I built a small fire outside and watched the smoke drift upward into the fading sky. The colors shifted from orange to violet. I thought about my patients, not their fears, but their faces, the humanity behind every intrusive thought. Each one of them had been trying to escape the same thing I had feared. Silence. In the days that followed, I slept well. The voices faded, leaving only my own steady thoughts. Before leaving, I stood once more on the porch at dawn. The mist lifted slowly from the trees, revealing their dark green crowns. The air was cold, clean, alive. I realized something then. Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of everything you've avoided hearing. Out here, surrounded by wilderness, I had heard it all: fear, guilt, memory, and finally truth. When I drove away, the gravel crunched beneath the tires, echoing faintly behind me. I didn't look back at the cabin. I didn't need to. The forest had given me what I came for, not escape but understanding. Now, months later, when I sit across from a patient and listen to their thoughts, I no longer fear the silence that follows. I let it stretch, breathe, exist. It is in that silence that healing begins, not only for them, but for me. And sometimes, late at night, when my apartment grows quiet and the city hum fades, I can still feel that Oregon air. I can still smell pine and rain, still see the soft mist rising from the earth. The forest hasn't left me. It never will. It waits behind the silence, patient and alive, like a thought that finally learned how to listen. The first sign that something was wrong was not the snow, but the silence. It was a Tuesday in the heart of January, and the old grandfather clock in the corner of the cabin had just chimed 4 times, its brass notes swallowed by the thick, falling dusk. I stood at the large picture window, a steaming mug of hot chocolate warming my hands, and watched the world turn white. The snow had begun as a gentle dusting just after lunch, but now it was a relentless, swirling curtain, driven by a wind that moaned under the eaves of the A-frame cabin. The tall, dark pines that stood as silent sentinels around our little retreat were already heavy with the weight of it, their branches bowing low as if in respect to the storm's power. My wife, Sarah, was building a fire, the dry kindling crackling to life with a promise of warmth. Our 2 children, 7-year-old Leo and 10-year-old Mia, were sprawled on the wool rug in front of the hearth, assembling a puzzle of the solar system. This was our winter sanctuary, a week away from the city's noise in the remote reaches of the Colorado Rockies. The cabin had been in Sarah's family for decades, a sturdy, rustic place filled with the smell of pine sap and wood smoke. It was supposed to be a reset, a digital detox. We had no cell service, no internet. Our only link to the outside world was a landline phone that now seemed as ancient and fragile as a relic. "It's really coming down out there," I said, my breath fogging the cold glass. Sarah came to stand beside me, wiping her hands on her jeans. She leaned her head against my shoulder. The weather radio said it would taper off by nightfall. Her voice was hopeful, but I could feel the slight tension in her frame. The static-laced voice on the emergency radio an hour ago had spoken of unexpected intensification, of a warning, not a watch. I took a sip of the hot chocolate, the sweetness a comfort. "We've got plenty of wood. The generator's full. We'll be fine." I said it to convince myself as much as her. It was Leo who noticed it first. "The light blinked," he said, not looking up from a stubborn piece of Jupiter. We both glanced at the wrought iron chandelier above the dining table. Its 3 bulbs glowed steadily, casting a warm, yellow light on the worn wooden surface. Probably just the wind jostling the lines, I reasoned. The power lines here were above ground, strung through miles of forest, vulnerable to every gust and falling branch. It was a common enough occurrence. But then it happened again. This time, the lights didn't just flicker, they died completely. The cabin was plunged into a deep, startling blackness, the only light coming from the orange pulse of the fire. A collective gasp went through the room. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the rising howl of the wind outside. "Dad!" Mia's voice was small. "It's okay, sweetie. The generator will kick on." I waited, counting the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. The generator was supposed to engage after a 5-second delay to prevent damage from momentary outages. I reached 10. Nothing. The darkness remained absolute beyond the fire's reach. "David!" Sarah's hand found my arm in the dark. "I'll check it." I moved carefully, my eyes slowly adjusting. I found the heavy-duty flashlight we kept by the door, its beam cutting a sharp, white path through the gloom. I pulled on my boots and coat, the cold air in the cabin already beginning to bite. "Stay by the fire." The utility room was a small, unheated space at the back of the cabin. The generator was an old, hulking thing, but it had always been reliable. I shone the light on its control panel. The power indicator light was dark. I traced the heavy-duty cord from the generator to the external transfer switch. It was plugged in securely. I flipped the manual override switch. Nothing, not even a sputter. I opened the fuel cap and shone the light inside. It was full. A cold knot, separate from the winter chill, began to form in my stomach. I tried the primer bulb, I checked the choke. It was as if the machine had simply decided to stop living. Defeated, I returned to the main room. It's not starting. I don't know why. Sarah's face was a mask of concern in the firelight. What do? We have the fireplace. We have sleeping bags. We'll be cold, but we'll be okay until morning. Maybe the main power will come back on, or the storm will let up. I tried to sound confident. Let's get all the blankets together, and the other flashlights. We busied ourselves, creating a nest of blankets and thick sleeping bags near the hearth. The children, sensing our unease, were quiet and helpful. We had 4 good flashlights and a box of batteries. We lit the old kerosene lantern that hung on the wall, its soft, hissing light adding to the fire's glow. For a while, we sat there, huddled together, telling stories and trying to ignore the growing cold that pressed in from the edges of the room. The windows were now just black squares, the world outside utterly lost. And then the lights came back on. The chandelier blazed to life, so sudden and bright it made us all blink. The clock on the wall whirred and began to reset itself. Yes, Leo cheered, throwing his arms in the air. A wave of relief washed over me. See? Just a glitch. I stood up, stretching. I'm going to check the thermostat, get some heat back in here. I had taken 2 steps towards the hallway when the lights went out again. Just as abruptly as they had come on, they were gone. The cabin was once more a cave of shadows and firelight. We all fell silent. This was different from the first time. This felt deliberate. The knot in my stomach tightened. Must be a bad connection, Sarah murmured, pulling Leo closer. We waited. The wind screamed. A minute passed, then 2. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. And then, with the same jarring suddenness, the lights returned. They stayed on for almost 30 seconds this time, long enough for me to see the confusion on Sarah's face, long enough for Mia to say, "This is weird," before they cut out again. A pattern was emerging, but it was one that made no sense. Over the next hour, we sat in that strange, rhythmic dance of light and dark. The outages lasted anywhere from 10 seconds to a full minute. The periods of light were just as variable. There was no rhythm to it, no predictable cycle. It was maddening. It was Mia, with her sharp, observant mind, who finally connected the dots. She had been staring at the black window, her brow furrowed. During one of the brief respites of light, she spoke, her voice clear and certain. "It only goes out when something moves outside." Sarah and I looked at her, then at each other. "What do you mean, honey?" Sarah asked. "Watch," Mia said, pointing a finger at the chandelier. "Just watch the light." We did. The bulbs hummed, steady and bright. The fire was a secondary thing now. All our attention was fixed on that single source of electric comfort. The seconds stretched. 20, 30. I held my breath without realizing it. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a dark shape flit past the window. It was fast, just a blur of deeper black against the night, probably a branch torn loose by the wind. In the same instant, the lights died. The darkness felt heavier this time, charged with a new and terrible understanding. We sat in utter silence for a full minute, waiting. The lights flickered back on. We didn't speak. We just stared at the windows. The storm was a wall of white, a chaotic dance in the cone of the outside security light that was, for now, on. Nothing moved. The lights stayed on. A full minute passed. Then 2. "It was probably just a coincidence," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. As if to contradict her, Leo, fidgeting, stood up and walked to the window to look out. The moment his small form moved into the frame of the large picture window, the lights cut out. He yelped and scrambled back to the rug. The lights returned a few seconds later. A cold dread, far colder than the winter air, began to seep into my bones. This was not a problem with the power lines. This was not a faulty generator. This was something else. Something outside was aware of us. Something outside reacted to movement. "Everyone, stay away from the windows," I said, my voice low and tight. "And stay still." We became statues in our own home. The children huddled against Sarah, their eyes wide with a fear they didn't fully understand but could acutely feel. I remained seated, my muscles aching with the tension of immobility. The fire was beginning to die down, but none of us dared to add another log. The act of reaching for the woodpile, of moving an arm, felt like a terrifying gamble. For a long time, nothing happened. The lights remained on. The only movement was the slow, flickering dance of the fire shadows on the log walls. The only sound was the relentless wind. We were prisoners in a circle of warmth and light, surrounded by an invisible warden. Then I saw it. Through the window to the left of the front door, a shape resolved itself from the swirling snow. It was not a branch. It was too large, too deliberate. It was a shadow, tall and impossibly thin, that passed through the beam of the security light. It moved with a slow, deliberate gait, and as it passed through the lights inside the cabin cut off. We were plunged into blackness. A small whimper escaped Leo. Sarah shushed him gently, but her own breathing was quick and shallow. I strained my eyes, trying to see through the window, but the darkness was absolute. The thing, whatever it was out there, standing in the storm, in the silence it had commanded. The lights came back on. I didn't move my head, but my eyes scanned the window. Nothing, just the driving snow. "David," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "What was that?" "I don't know," I breathed. "An animal. A moose, maybe. They looked big and strange in the snow." It was a pathetic lie, and we all knew it. The shape had been upright. It had walked. Another movement, this time from the right side of the cabin. A flicker in the periphery. The lights went out. This time, the outage lasted longer. In the deep silence of the dark, we heard a new sound. A soft, scraping noise against the outer log wall. It was a dry, rasping sound, like bark being dragged over rough wood. It started near the corner of the room and moved slowly along the side of the cabin towards the front. My heart hammered against my ribs. I could feel the children trembling. The scraping stopped. The lights returned. We held our breath, waiting. A thump on the roof directly above us, heavy and solid. A shower of snow slid down the metal roofing with a long, slow sigh. The lights did not go out. The thing was on the roof and it wasn't moving. My mind raced, cycling through every piece of survival knowledge I possessed. We were isolated. No communication. The truck was buried under a foot of snow and probably wouldn't start in this cold, even if we could dig it out. On foot, in this storm, with 2 children, we wouldn't last an hour. The cabin was our only shelter, but it was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap, and the trigger was movement. I thought of the landmarks I knew. The creek was about 100 yards to the north, frozen over. The main dirt road was a mile to the south, impassable now. There was another cabin, the Miller place, maybe 2 miles east through dense forest. 2 miles in a blizzard, in the dark, with an unknown predator that was triggered by motion. It was a death sentence. The thumping on the roof started again, a slow, deliberate walk from one end of the A-frame to the other. Each step was a hollow, ominous knock. Then it stopped directly above the fireplace chimney. We all looked up. A fine trickle of soot and dust rained down into the fire. "It's going to come down the chimney," Mia whispered, her voice thick with terror. The old chimney was wide, but it had a metal flue. I had closed it when I started the fire, right? I tried to remember the sequence of my actions from what felt like a lifetime ago. I had opened the flue to draw the smoke. Then, had I closed it after the fire was established? Couldn't recall. It was a simple chain pull mechanism. If it was open, that thing, that creature could... A low, guttural sound echoed down the chimney pipe. It wasn't a growl, not an animal sound. It was deeper, a vibration more than a noise, like stones grinding together deep under the earth. The chain on the flue rattled. I had to move. I had to close it. But if I stood, if I walked to the fireplace, the lights would go out. We would be in darkness, and it would know exactly where I was. The grinding sound came again, closer this time. More soot fell, blackening the edges of the fire. The decision was made for me. The danger of the flue being open was greater than the danger of moving. "When the lights go out," I whispered to Sarah, "shine your flashlight at the ceiling. Not at me, at the ceiling. Light up the room." She nodded, her face pale. She understood. We had to create our own light. I took a deep breath, my muscles coiling. I looked at my family, their faces terrified but trusting. Then I stood up. Instantly, the cabin was plunged into absolute blackness. The fire seemed to gutter, as if the darkness itself was suffocating it. Now Sarah. A beam of white light lanced upwards from Sarah's flashlight, bouncing off the vaulted pine ceiling and illuminating the room in a soft, diffuse glow. It was better than nothing. I didn't look at the windows. I focused on the fireplace. 3 steps. I could see the soot-blackened chain hanging down. A tremendous scraping, scratching sound erupted from the chimney. A frantic, desperate noise. It was trying to get in. Now, I lunged for the chain, my hand closing around the cold, gritty metal. I pulled. It was stuck. I pulled again, putting my whole weight into it. With a screech of protesting metal, the flue slammed shut. At that exact moment, the scratching stopped. A heavy, solid weight hit the closed flue with a dull, metallic clang that shook the entire fireplace. Then silence. The lights flickered back on. I was standing by the hearth, my chest heaving, my hands still gripping the chain. We all stared at the metal plate of the flue, half expecting it to burst open. It held. Nothing happened for a long time. The wind continued to roar. The fire began to burn lower. We didn't dare move. The creature on the roof was silent. Had it given up? Had it left? It was Leo who broke the tense silence, his voice barely a whisper. "Is it gone?" As if in answer, a new sound began. It started as a soft tap on one of the windows, then another tap on a different window, then a third. It was a slow, random percussion, like large, hard fingertips drumming on the glass. The taps didn't try to break the glass. They were exploratory, patient. The lights flickered with each tap, dimming and brightening in a chaotic rhythm. I slowly, carefully, turned my head to look at the large picture window. The snow was still falling, but for a moment, the wind seemed to relent, and the security light outside illuminated a patch of the storm. And there, pressed against the glass, was a face. It was long and pale, the color of old bone. It had no eyes that I could see, just deep, dark hollows. Its mouth was a wide, lipless gash. It wasn't human. It wasn't any animal I had ever seen or heard of. It was just a shape, a terrible, silent shape looking in at us. It tilted its head, and one long, thin finger, bone-white and jointed in too many places, tapped once, deliberately, on the pane. The lights went out and stayed out. This was different. This was not a temporary outage. This was a statement. It was done playing. In the profound blackness, we heard the front door handle rattle. It was a slow, testing turn. The deadbolt held. Then a quiet, insistent scratching began at the doorframe, as if something was trying to find the latch mechanism from the outside. We were going to die here. The thought was clear and cold. We would freeze or that thing would get in, but we were going to die. I looked at my family in the faint, dying light of the fire. Sarah had her arms around both children, her head bowed over theirs. She was whispering to them, soothing words, a mother's final gift of comfort. A strange calm settled over me. This was it. This was the end. I would not go quietly. I stood up, my joints protesting. I walked to the door, my footsteps loud in the silent cabin. The scratching stopped. I put my hand against the solid wood of the door. It was ice cold. "Get away from my family," I said, my voice low but clear. There was no sound from the other side, no movement. The wind seemed to pause for a moment, holding its breath, and then a sound, but not from the door. It was a high, mechanical ring, the old landline phone. The sound was so alien, so unexpected, that it took me a second to recognize it. We all jumped. The phone hadn't worked in years. The line was always down. It rang again, insistent. I stumbled through the darkness towards the kitchen counter where the old beige phone sat. I fumbled for the receiver, my hands shaking, and brought it to my ear. "Hello." My voice was a croak. There was a burst of static, then a voice, faint and broken. "Miller, you there? Generator's magnetic cutoff, storm, solar flare, causing weird surges, trip with movement, you copy." Get to my place." It was Old Man Miller from 2 miles away. The line crackled and died, going dead silent. Magnetic cutoff, solar flare, tripping with movement. The words swirled in my head, trying to find purchase in a mind clouded by supernatural terror. It wasn't a monster. It was the storm, a geomagnetic storm, interacting with the old, poorly shielded wiring of the cabin and the generator safety system. The generator had a magnetic cutoff switch to protect it from power surges. The intense magnetic activity from the solar flare was causing phantom surges. And movement outside. A person, an animal, even a heavy branch. Must have been enough to alter the local magnetic field minutely, just enough to trigger the switch. The scraping, the thumping, the tapping. It was all the storm. The face at the window. A trick of the light and snow and my own terrified mind. Pareidolia born of fear. The relief was so immense it felt like a physical blow. I started to laugh, a shaky, half-hysterical sound. "David," Sarah asked, her voice terrified. "It's not a monster," I managed to say. Tears of relief and released tension streaming down my face. "It's the storm, a solar flare. It's messing with the power. The generator shuts off when the magnetic field changes." I tried to explain the jumble of words from Mr. Miller. As I spoke, the lights flickered back on. This time, they didn't go out. They stayed on. The scratching at the door did not resume. The tapping on the windows was gone. The wind was still howling, but its voice had lost its malicious edge. It was just weather again. We spent the rest of the night by the fire, not sleeping, but wrapped in a blanket of exhausted relief. The lights remained steady. The storm began to weaken just before dawn, the snow thinning from a raging wall to a gentle fall. When the gray morning light finally illuminated the world, it revealed a landscape transformed. 2 feet of pristine snow covered everything, smoothing the harsh edges of the forest. The trees stood motionless, their branches glittering with ice. It was breathtakingly beautiful, a scene of perfect peace. We were safe. We were cold and tired, but we were safe. The lesson was not about monsters in the dark. It was about the monsters we create in our own minds when faced with the unknown. It was about the thin, fragile line between rational fear and primal terror, and how easily that line can be erased by a flickering light and the moan of the wind. We had learned the hard way that the most dangerous wilderness is not the one outside your door, but the one that grows in the shadows of your own fear. And we learned that sometimes the most terrifying thing you can encounter is a simple, natural explanation, hiding just behind a mask of utter dread.